Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are tackling a story that I think almost everyone knows, or at least they think they know.
Right.
We're talking about Joseph. You know, the coat of many colors, the dreams, the jealous brothers, the rise to power in Egypt.
Whole epic saga.
It's the ultimate rags to riches story, right? I mean, it's the blockbuster movie script of the Old Testament. It's got the musical, it's got the drama, it's got that perfect happy ending.
It certainly is structured that way in our popular imagination. It's almost always presented as a story of triumph. You know, you keep the faith, you work hard, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and eventually you get the palace.
Yeah.
It's the proto-American dream, in a way.
Exactly. It's the hang in there poster with the kitten, but the kitten becomes the prime minister of Egypt.
That's a great way to put it.
But today, we are going to flip that script entirely upside down. We have a stack of documents here that frames this narrative in a completely different light. We aren't looking at Joseph the successful administrator or Joseph the hero. We're looking at Joseph the mystic.
That's right. We are diving into a spiritual commentary titled The Spiritual Path of Joseph, Through Suffering to Perfection.
And the primary voice in our source material today is Motte-Guyon, who was a 17th century French mystic. And she was actually imprisoned for her writings on what she called the inner life.
Which is, I mean, that's deeply ironic considering we're talking about Joseph in prison today.
Right.
And I think we need to set the stage on her a little bit because she's not your typical Sunday school teacher, is she?
Oh, far from it. Motte-Guyon was a really controversial figure in France during the time of Louis XIV. She was part of a movement called Quietism, which emphasized a complete passive abandonment to God's will.
Okay.
And when we say she was in prison, we're not talking about, house arrest in a nice chateau.
Right.
She spent time in the Bastille. The Bastille.
Yeah.
The symbol of oppression.
Exactly. So when she writes about Joseph sitting in a dungeon dealing with false accusations and, the silence of God, she isn't writing from an ivory tower.
No.
She knows what the damn stone feels like. She knows the psychological toll of being innocent yet condemned.
That gives her perspective a lot of weight. It's one thing to read a theologian theorizing about suffering. It's a whole other thing to read a prisoner writing about freedom.
Precisely. And her central argument, the core of this commentary, is that the story of Joseph isn't about success in the worldly sense at all. It's about stripping.
Stripping.
Yeah, it's about the psychological and spiritual dismantling of the self so that a person can be filled entirely with God.
Stripping, that's a visceral word. It sounds painful.
It is painful. It's surgery. She argues that every bad thing that happens to Joseph, the pit, the slavery, the prison, it isn't an obstacle to the plan.
It is the plan.
It is the plan.
So the mission for today is to explore this concept of the inner life, or the interior way. We're going to trace Joseph's journey from that colorful coat all the way to the prison cell, but through this lens of spiritual surgery. We want to see how the outer man is destroyed so the inner man can rise.
And we have to ask the big question that the text poses, for you, for all of us. Is it possible that the betrayal, the false accusations, and the suffering were actually the safest places for Joseph to be?
That is a tough sell. Hey, come jump in this pit. It's safe down here. I mean, most of us spend our entire lives trying to avoid the pit. We buy insurance, we network, we save money, all to stay out of the pit.
Of course. It runs counter to every survival instinct we have.
But that's what we're going to unpack. So let's start at the beginning. The coat. Genesis 37.
The coat of many colors. The iconic image.
Right. In Sunday school, this is just a cool gift. It shows his dad loves him. It's a status symbol. But our source material calls this the period of spiritual infancy. What does that mean? Why infancy?
Well, think about how you treat a literal infant or a toddler. If you're a parent, or even if you've just been around kids, you know the drill.
Sure.
You give them toys, you give them sweets, you cuddle them, you make their environment very, very pleasant to get them to trust you. You don't ask a toddler to pay rent. You don't ask them to, sacrifice for the good of the family. You just love them.
You bribe them with comfort.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And Motte-Guyon argues that in the beginning of the spiritual journey, God acts like a doting parent. The coat represents sensible grace.
Sensible grace. Let's define that because that sounds like a big theological term, but it's actually about feelings, right? It's much simpler than it sounds.
It's all about feelings.
Exactly.
Sensible here means perceptible to the senses. It's the goosebumps phase.
Ah!
It's when everything feels spiritual and sweet. You pray, you feel amazing, like this warm wash of peace just comes over you. You read a text and it just lights up. You understand it instantly. The worship music makes you cry happy tears.
Yep.
The source says God decorates the soul with these gifts to attract it, just like Jacob decorated Joseph with this beautiful coat.
It's the honeymoon phase.
It is absolutely the honeymoon phase, and it's necessary. I mean, think about it. If the spiritual life started with the dungeon, nobody would sign up.
No way.
God has to hook you with the sweetness first.
Okay, so Joseph is walking around in this amazing Technicolor coat, feeling loved, feeling special. He's the golden child. But there's a problem with that, isn't there? The source implies that this state, while it feels nice, is actually kind of dangerous.
A massive problem,
Right.
a huge one. The source points out that when God, or in the story, the father, Jacob, visibly favors one child, it inevitably creates separation.
Yeah.
The text is brutal in its honesty here. It says Jacob loved Joseph more than his brethren.
Oof. That is the recipe for a dysfunctional family right there.
It really is. And the brothers hated him for it. The text says they couldn't even speak peaceably to him.
Because they only saw the external benefits. They just saw the coat. They saw the dad smiling at Joseph and, scowling at them.
I mean, they didn't understand the inner disposition, what was happening inside Joseph. To the brothers, this just looked like unfair favoritism.
Yeah.
And this is the first danger of spiritual infancy that the source highlights. When you are in that sweet phase, you stick out.
And not in a good way. You become annoying.
You really do. Think about that new convert energy. Someone just discovers a new philosophy or religion or even a new diet, and they are just glowing. They're so happy.
Oh, yeah. They can't stop talking about it.
Exactly. But to the people around them who are in the grind of daily life, that glow can be, well, irritating. It feels like an implicit judgment. Why are you so special? Why is life so easy for you?
Why do you get the coat and I get the chores?
Precisely. The source says that this visible favor invites hostility from those who only see the external. But the bigger problem is actually inside Joseph himself. And this leads us to the second mistake Joseph makes. According to this commentary, he shares the dream.
Oh, the sheaves of wheat bowing down. And then the second dream, the one with the sun, moon, and stars all bowing to him.
Right. Now, typically we view this as Joseph being a prophet.
Yeah.
He's telling the truth. God did give him those dreams. He will rule over them eventually.
Sure, it's foreshadowing.
It is. But our source critiques Joseph here. It calls him innocent, but also imprudent.
In what way? I mean, is it wrong to tell the truth?
It's not about truth versus falsehood. It's about wisdom. He shares a profound, deep spiritual insight with brethren who are not in the same spiritual state. They're not ready for it. The source explicitly mentions the biblical idea of casting pearls before swine.
Ouch. Calling the patriarchs of Israel swine, that seems harsh.
It is a harsh metaphor,
Yeah.
but let's unpack what it means in this context. It's not about calling them literal animals. It's a metaphor for a spiritual mismatch. Pearls are things of great value, these deep interior truths. Swine, in the context of the metaphor, are creatures that cannot appreciate the value of a pearl. They will just trample it.
Because you can't eat a pearl. It has no utility to a pig. It's just a rock.
Exactly. So if you have a deep interior experience, a vision of your destiny, or a powerful sense of God's calling, and you share it with people who are operating purely on a natural, competitive, who's on top level, they aren't going to say, oh, wow, tell me more about your inner life.
They're going to say, who do you think you are? You think you're better than us.
Precisely. They interpret the dream as pride and fantasy. The source says that to the natural man, spiritual confidence always looks like arrogance. Joseph thought he was sharing a bond with his brothers. Hey guys, look what God showed me. Isn't this cool? But because they couldn't understand the source of the dream, they attacked the dreamer.
It's interesting because Joseph really doesn't seem to have any malice in the text. He just seems naive. He's like a kid running in saying, hey, big brothers, check this out.
And that is the hallmark of the spiritual infant. They enjoy the gifts of God so much that they assume everyone else will be just as excited about them.
Yeah.
They lack the wisdom to know when to be silent. The source emphasizes that silence is a major discipline of the inner life. You have to learn to contain the grace, to hold it, not just splash it all over everyone.
Because if you splash it on the wrong people, they might just bite you.
And that lack of silence, that imprudence, it precipitates the crisis. His mouth gets him in trouble.
Which brings us to Dothan, Section 2, our deep dive. The conspiracy. This is where the story shifts from a family drama to a full-on thriller.
It really does. So Joseph is sent by his father to check on the brothers at Dothan. He's walking toward them, probably wearing that very coat.
And they see him coming from a distance. And they say, here comes the dreamer. You can just hear the sneer in that phrase.
The contempt is palpable, and they plot to kill him. Now, I want to slow down here because the commentary offers a really fascinating psychological profile of the brothers. It would be so easy to just say they were jealous villains, they were bad apples.
Right. Bad guys doing bad things. Simple as that. Cut and dry.
But the source argues it's more complex and, frankly, more chilling than that. It says they represent religious persecutors.
Religious persecutors. Wow. That implies they think they're doing something righteous.
Yes, that's the terrifying part. The text says they fake a zeal for God. They accuse the innocent of imaginary crimes to justify destroying them.
So they're building a case in their own minds.
They're building a case. Think about it. They don't just say, we hate him because we are jealous. That would be too honest, too self-aware.
Right.
They rationalize it. They say, let's see what becomes of his dreams. They view him as a disruptor of the family order, a threat to the way things are.
So, in their minds, they are almost protecting the family from this delusional kid who thinks he's going to rule over them. They are preserving the hierarchy.
Precisely. The source notes that people who oppose the inner way, this path of deep personal connection with God, often do so under the guise of orthodoxy or maintaining order. They attack the reputation of the teacher to destroy the teaching.
Yeah.
They want to kill the dreamer so they don't have to deal with the dream.
That is heavy. It makes them sound much more dangerous than just schoolyard bullies.
Yeah.
They are ideologues. They have a twisted moral framework that justifies murder.
That's the scariest kind of villain, isn't it? The one who thinks he's the hero.
Yeah, absolutely. But then we have Reuben, the oldest brother.
Reuben. He's a complicated figure.
He steps in. He hears the plot to kill Joseph and says, no, let's not shed blood. Let's just throw him in this pit. And the text says he planned to come back later and rescue Joseph.
Reuben is the good guy in the horror movie, right?
Sure.
He's the one trying to de-escalate.
Yeah, he's trying to save his brother. He's got a conscience. He's the voice of reason.
But here is where Madame Guillon's commentary gets really, really counterintuitive.
Okay.
She interprets Reuben's intervention not as a heroic act, but as a symbol of our natural inclination trying to save someone from the cross.
Wait, unpack that. Trying to save someone from the cross. That sounds like a good thing. Shouldn't we save people from crosses?
In the normal world, yes, of course.
Right.
But in the spiritual world of this text, no.
Oh, God.
The premise of this entire deep dive is that Joseph needs to go through this suffering to become who he's meant to be. He needs to lose the coat. He needs to be humbled. The pit is actually God's will for Joseph at this moment.
So Reuben, by trying to rescue him,
is actually interfering with the work of God. The source argues that well-meaning people often try to rescue us from the suffering that God has actually ordained for our growth.
wow.
They see us in pain, and their natural human instinct is, get him out of there. Fix it. Stop the pain.
But if Reuben had succeeded, I mean, let's play it out. If he had actually succeeded, pulled Joseph out of the pit and sent him home, what happens?
Well, what happens?
Joseph goes back to Jacob. He puts the coat back on. He stays the spoiled favorite. He probably tells more dreams.
Exactly. He remains a spiritual infant. He never goes to Egypt. He never learns to manage a household or a prison or an entire empire. He never saves the world from famine. The entire destiny of Israel, the entire plan is short-circuited because Big Brother wanted to be nice.
Whoa. So the rescuer can actually be an obstacle to destiny.
Exactly. It's a very challenging thought. It suggests that sometimes when we are in a pit, the person lowering a ladder might actually be interrupting a necessary surgery. The rescue might be a temptation to abort the process of growth.
That brings us to the pit itself. Reuben convinces them to throw him in, but first they strip him.
The first stripping.
They rip that coat off, the symbol of his father's love, his identity, his specialness, it's just gone, and they throw him in. And the text notes the pit was empty, there was no water.
This is the end of the sweet phase. This is the end of the honeymoon. The source is very poetic here. It says the coat, that sensible grace, those happy feelings, is ripped away. And to the spiritual infant, this feels like death.
Because they've equated the feeling of God with God himself. Is that the idea?
Correct. That's the danger of the infancy stage. You think God is the goosebumps? You think God is the blessing. So when the goosebumps stop, when the blessing stops, you think God has died or God has left.
The source calls this the game of death.
Yes. It describes God's process as a continuous cycle of death and life. He withdraws to test the soul, appearing cruel to be kind. Joseph is sitting in that dark, dry pit, It's silent. It's cold. He's probably screaming for help, and his brothers are just up there eating lunch.
Talk about psychological torture, the casual cruelty of it.
And he's wondering, why isn't my father coming? Why isn't God stopping this? I had the dreams. I'm the special one. He's in total confusion.
And the source says this confusion is necessary.
It says that if he kept the coat, he would remain a child. The stripping is the only way to maturity. He has to learn to exist without the external validation of the colors. He has to learn to find God in the dark, in the nakedness, in the silence.
So he's in the pit, despairing. And then comes the business deal.
The transaction.
Judah, another brother, looks up and sees a caravan of Ishmaelites and Midianites, and he says, "What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him."
Let's monetize this problem. It's so cynical.
It's unbelievably cynical. 20 pieces of silver. Joseph goes from being the favored son to a piece of merchandise.
This moves us into section 3, sold into slavery. And the source makes a really interesting theological connection here. It connects Joseph's being sold to Egypt with St. Paul's concept in Romans 7 of being sold under sin.
Sold under sin. That sounds grim. That sounds like he's becoming a sinner.
It does. It sounds awful. But there's a crucial distinction we need to make here based on the text. The source distinguishes between being subject to the tyranny of sin versus actually yielding to it.
Okay, let's break that down because that's a nuanced point. I want to make sure I get that.
So Joseph is physically sold into Egypt. Now, in biblical symbolism, Egypt almost always represents the world, or the realm of sin and the flesh. It's the place of bondage.
Right.
So Joseph is transported from the Holy Land, perhaps father's house, into the land of sin. He is surrounded by it. He is a slave to it in a legal sense. He has to obey pagan masters. He is immersed in a culture that doesn't know his God. He's completely out of his element.
But he doesn't become a sinner.
Right. He is sold to sin, but he does not obey it in his heart. The text says he enters a state of slavery, which represents the human condition. We are stuck in a broken world, surrounded by temptation and oppression.
Right.
We have to pay taxes to corrupt governments. We have to deal with broken systems. We are sold under it. We're subject to it.
But Joseph's inner life remains free. He's not corrupted by it.
Exactly. He is a captive physically, but spiritually, he hasn't surrendered. He is in the world, but not of it. But to the outside observer, he just looks like a slave. He looks like he's lost everything. He's just another piece of property.
And speaking of outside observers, let's go back to Jacob. Because there's a deception happening back home that is just, it's heartbreaking.
The coat again? It always comes back to the coat.
The brothers take that beautiful coat, which is now just a rag to them. They kill a goat, dip the coat in blood, and send it to Jacob.
And Jacob looks at it and makes this horrific deduction. He says, "It is my son's coat. An evil beast has devoured him."
Now, this is one of the most fascinating insights from the source material for me. It contrasts Jacob's grief for Joseph with his grief for Rachel.
Yeah, this is a brilliant point. Remember, Rachel was his favorite wife. She was Joseph's mother. When she died, giving birth to Benjamin, Jacob was heartbroken, completely devastated. But he accepted it.
Right.
He buried her. He marked the grave. He said, "This is God's will." It was a natural death. It was tragic, but it made sense in the order of things.
But here, with Joseph, he's absolutely distraught. The text says he refused to be comforted. All his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, and he just wouldn't have it. Why the difference? Why is this grief so much worse?
Because of the nature of the death he imagines. He concludes a wild beast has devoured him. The source interprets beast here as a symbol for a demon or a spiritual delusion. Jacob isn't just grieving a physical death. He's grieving what he perceives as a spiritual destruction.
He thinks Joseph was torn apart by chaos, that his soul was lost.
Yes, he thinks Joseph's special destiny was violently snuffed out by evil. And Jacob in this moment represents the spiritual observer or the religious expert who looks at someone going through a dark night of the soul, someone who has been stripped, and completely misinterprets what is happening.
So Jacob sees the bloody coat, the evidence of suffering, the evidence of the stripping, and he thinks, oh no, Joseph has been destroyed. The devil got him. He's finished.
Exactly. He's lost. He's fallen from grace. Look at the mess. It's all over. But in reality, what is happening to Joseph?
He's on his way to Egypt to fulfill the dream. He's alive. He's on the path.
He is alive. He's moving toward his destiny. The source says this is a huge lesson for us. Even holy people like Jacob, people we look up to, can completely misinterpret the stripping of a soul. They see the external mess, the loss of reputation, the loss of the coat, the depression, the job loss, and assume the person has failed.
They see the blood and assume death.
But they don't see the life and rest that is actually hidden in Joseph's journey. It's a warning to us not to judge someone's spiritual state by their external circumstances. Just because someone is in a pit or sold into slavery doesn't mean God has abandoned them.
It might mean God is doing his best work and we just can't see the full picture yet.
It usually does. God works in the dark.
So Joseph arrives in Egypt. He's sold to Potiphar, the captain of the guard. And this starts section 4, the paradox of prosperity.
This is a weird interlude in the suffering, isn't it? The text says, the Lord was with Joseph and he was a prosperous man.
Even though he's a slave, that's a contradiction in terms, usually. Prosperous slave.
It is. But he rises to the top of the household. Potiphar sees that everything Joseph touches turns to gold. So he puts him in charge of everything. The accounts, the staff, the food. Joseph basically becomes the CEO of Potiphar Inc.
It seems like things are looking up. Maybe the stripping is over. Maybe he passed the test in the pit and now he gets the reward. You know, you can kind of feel that relief.
That's the trap. That's what we want to believe. Okay, lesson learned. Back to the good times. But the source describes this as a respite. It's just a pause. It says God's hand strikes and supports simultaneously.
Strikes and supports.
Yes, it calls this state pleasurable pain.
Explain that. That sounds like a contradiction.
Well, the soul is wounded because it has lost its freedom. That's the striking.
Yeah.
He is still a slave, remember. He can't go home. He can't see his father. He's trapped.
Right.
But it is sustained by God's presence and favor. That's the support. It's a time of relief, a little breathing room. But the source warns that this is only to prepare the soul for a much heavier blow.
A heavier blow? He's already been sold into slavery. What could possibly be worse than being human trafficked by your own brothers?
The loss of his integrity. Or at least the appearance of the loss of integrity.
Potiphar's wife.
Potiphar's wife, the antagonist of Act 2.
She casts her eyes on Joseph, and let's be real, the text makes a point of saying Joseph was apparently a very good-looking guy. It says he was handsome in form and appearance.
And she's powerful. She's the boss's life. She has all the power in this situation. And she says, lie with me.
This is a test on multiple levels. It's a test of lust, sure, but it's also a test of power. If he says yes, he probably gets favors. He gets safety. He solidifies his position.
If he says no, he risks her wrath. And Joseph knows this. He's smart. He's not naive anymore. But he refuses. He gives that famous speech. My master has withheld nothing from me but you. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?
He passes the test. He is loyal to his master and loyal to God. He chooses righteousness. He does the right thing.
But this brings us to what the source calls the trap of innocence.
The trap of innocence.
She grabs him by his garment. He runs away. But here, he leaves the garment in her hand.
He loses another coat.
He really has bad luck with outerwear. It's a theme. The outer covering keeps getting stripped away.
First, the coat of many colors, which was his identity as a son. Now the slave's garment, his identity as a servant.
But look at the choice he had to make. The source analyzes this as a terrible blow. Joseph faced a binary choice. Sin or die.
If he sleeps with her, he sins against God. But he probably keeps his job and his life, at least for a while.
If he runs, he preserves his purity. But he leaves the physical evidence that will be used to frame him. He knows that by running, by dropping that garment, he is condemning himself.
And the source emphasizes this point.
Heavily, it says that sometimes the only way to avoid the substance of a sin is to accept the label of a sinner.
Wow, that cuts against everything we are taught. We are taught to protect our reputation at all costs, avoid even the appearance of evil.
Right. We want the credit for our virtue. We want to be good, but we also want to be seen as good. We want the plaque on the wall, the certificate. Joseph gets the opposite. He gets the punishment for a vice he didn't commit. He has to trade his reputation for his conscience.
That is the ultimate stripping. Losing your good name when you've done everything right.
It is. And Madame Guyon writes about this passionately because she experienced it herself. She was slandered as a heretic when she felt she was just loving God. She knows the deep pain of being innocent but being regarded as guilty by everyone.
And Potiphar's wife uses that cloak. She screams, she calls the servants, she tells Potiphar, the Hebrew servant came in to mock me. She plays the victim perfectly.
And Potiphar believes her.
Yeah.
Or maybe he just has to support his wife publicly. Either way, the hammer drops.
And this leads to the darkest part of the journey. Section 5. The prison.
Potiphar throws him into the prison where the king's prisoners are bound.
This isn't just county jail. This is a political dungeon. This is the bottom of the barrel, the end of the line.
And the source notes that Joseph's suffering here is compounded. It's not just the physical confinement, the chains, the darkness. It's the slander. He is accused by the very people he serves so faithfully.
He did everything right. That's the part that stings the most. He ran the house perfectly. He resisted temptation. He was the model employee and the model believer. And his reward for all that virtue is a dungeon. It feels cosmically unfair. It feels like God broke the deal.
I did my part, God. Where are you?
Exactly.
And this is what the source calls the work of the cross. It argues that external persecution, the prison, combines with internal suffering, the confusion, the sense of abandonment, to accelerate the death of the self.
The self being that part of us that says, I deserve better, this isn't fair, I'm a good person, and good things should happen to me.
Exactly. That whole part of us has to die. In the prison, all of that has to die. You can't cling to your rights when you are rotting in a dungeon for a crime you didn't commit. You have to let go. You have to abandon yourself entirely to God. You have to stop defending yourself because you can't defend yourself.
You are totally and completely helpless.
And in that helplessness, you find a new kind of strength.
And this brings us to a really powerful comparison the source makes. It compares Joseph in prison to King David on his throne.
Yes, this is the innocent prisoner versus the guilty king. This is a brilliant juxtaposition.
Set that up for us.
Okay, so look at King David. He's the other great hero of the Old Testament. But look at his low point. He commits adultery with Bathsheba. Then, to cover it up, he has her husband Uriah killed in battle.
So he actually commits the crime that Joseph refused to commit and then adds murder on top of it.
Exactly. David is guilty of adultery and murder. But he remains king. He stays on the throne. He keeps his crown. He keeps his palace. He keeps his power.
He suffers consequences later, sure, but he doesn't lose his status.
Right. Then you have Joseph. He refuses adultery. He remains pure. And he ends up in chains. He loses everything.
So on the surface, looking at it with worldly eyes, it pays to be David. It's better to be the guilty king than the innocent prisoner.
On the surface, absolutely. But the source asks a penetrating question. Who is happier?
And the verdict.
The source claims the innocent prisoner is infinitely happier than the guilty king.
Why? I mean, that seems impossible. One guy's eating grapes in a palace, the other guy's eating moldy bread in a hole in the ground.
Because of inner peace.
Nah.
Joseph retained his integrity. He lost his freedom, he lost his name, he lost his coat. But he didn't lose his connection to God. His conscience was clear. He could sleep at night, even on a stone floor.
And David.
David sat on a throne, but read the songs he wrote during that time. Psalm 32, Psalm 51. He talks about his bones wasting away. He talks about the heavy hand of God on him day and night. His soul was tormented by his sin. He was a prisoner of his own guilt.
So the argument is that true freedom isn't about not being in prison. It's about not being a prisoner to sin.
Exactly. Joseph was bound by iron, but his spirit was free. David was free to rule, but his spirit was bound by guilt. Motte-Guyon is telling us, don't envy the guilty king. Don't envy the person who cheated to get to the top and seems to have it all. Be the innocent prisoner.
That's tough to swallow, but I see the logic. It completely redefines what the good life actually is. It's internal, not external.
It's the only life that lasts.
But Joseph doesn't just sit in the corner and meditate, right? Even in prison, something happens. He can't help himself. He starts working. He starts organizing.
Authority in chains. The keeper of the prison looks at Joseph and sees something different. He sees a calm, a capability, and integrity that's just undeniable. The text says the keeper committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. Whatever they did there, he was the doer of it.
It's Potiphar's house all over again.
Yeah, he keeps rising to the top. Even in the sewers, he floats to the top. It's incredible.
But notice the context. He is leading fellow prisoners. He isn't set free. He is still a prisoner himself.
The paradox of leadership? The source notes that Joseph, though a captive, was governing the whole world spiritually because he wasn't governed by it. He wasn't crushed by his circumstances, so he could rise above them and bring order. He created order out of chaos, even in a dungeon.
And he starts helping others. The butler, the baker, they get thrown in, they have dreams. And Joseph, the dreamer, interprets them.
And this leads to the final beautiful insight of the source material. It says that those who walk this path of suffering, this inner way, often become guides for others, even while they're still in the dark themselves.
Still in the dark themselves. That's poignant. Joseph interprets the butler's dream and says, you're going to get out in 3 days. You're going to be restored. He gives them this concrete hope.
But Joseph doesn't know when he's getting out. He has no timeline. For all he knows, he's going to die there. He even has to ask the butler, remember me when it goes well for you.
Yet he ministers to the butler. He gives hope to someone else, even though his own hope is deferred.
He is helping someone else find the exit while he is still locked in.
That is the definition of selfless service.
It is the perfection of abandonment. You stop worrying about your own deliverance and you just serve God where you are, even if where you are is a pit, even if where you are is a prison. You bloom where you are planted, even if you are planted in manure.
And the source implies that this is what qualifies him to eventually rule Egypt, this whole process.
Absolutely. Think about the timeline. Joseph was 17 when he was sold. He was 30 when he stood before Pharaoh. That's 13 years of stripping, 13 years of pits and prisons and false accusations.
That's a long time. That's a huge chunk of his young life.
It is, but that 13 years created the container. If he can govern a prison while being an innocent victim, he can govern an empire during a famine. The stripping created the capacity. The emptiness created the space for God to fill. If he was still full of himself, full of his coat energy from when he was 17, he would have been a disaster as a ruler.
He would have been arrogant. He would have been vindictive towards his brothers.
Instead, he was wise. He was humble. He was a savior.
Wow. So let's recap this journey, because it really is a complete inversion of the typical success story. We think the story is up, 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 but it's actually down, 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 and then up.
Right. It starts with the coat. Spiritual infancy. Pride. Sweetness. That false sense of security that comes from good feelings.
Then the dream. The mistake of sharing deep things with shallow people. The naivety of the untested soul.
Then the pit at Dothan. The first stripping. The loss of sensible grace. The silence of God that feels like abandonment.
Then the sale into slavery. Becoming a subject to the world but not a servant of it. Learning to serve in a hostile environment.
Then the false accusation. The second stripping. The loss of reputation. The trap of innocence. The choice to be pure rather than popular.
And finally, the prison. The total abandonment. The sovereignty and suffering. The death of the self that wants to be seen as good.
And through it all, the source says, God was not absent. He was the surgeon. He was the one holding the scalpel, removing the layers of self so that the true Joseph could finally emerge.
It really changes how you read the end of the story. When Joseph finally stands before his brothers years later, when he's the Prince of Egypt, holding the power of life and death over them, and he says that famous line,
You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good.
He isn't just saying, hey, it worked out in the end, no hard feelings. He's not just letting them off the hook.
No, he's saying something much, much deeper. He's saying the evil you did was the necessary instrument for the good God wanted to do in me and through me. He sees the whole arc. He realizes the pit was necessary. The prison was necessary. The stripping was the making of him.
He realizes that if they hadn't stripped him of the coat of many colors, he never would have put on the royal robes of Egypt.
Exactly.
So what does this mean for us, for the listener right now? Because most of us aren't going to become the prime minister of Egypt, but we all have pits. We all have moments of being stripped.
I think the core so what here is about how we interpret our own bad times.
Mm-hmm.
We usually view suffering as an interruption. I was living my life, and then this bad thing happened. I got sick, I got fired, I got betrayed, and now I have to get back to my life.
Right. We want to press the undo button. We view this suffering as a deviation from the plan, a detour.
But this text views suffering as the method. It suggests that the bad thing might not be an interruption at all. It might be the path itself.
It might be the stripping of the coat.
Exactly. It suggests that true freedom is found when one is stripped of everything, even one's good name, even one's comfort, and left with nothing but God. If you are in a pit right now, the source is inviting you to ask a different question.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Ask, what is God trying to strip away from me?
Is it my pride, my reliance on comfort, my need for approval from others?
Is it my attachment to the coat, whatever that coat may be for me?
So instead of asking, how do I get out of this? Maybe the first question is, what am I supposed to lose here?
That's the dangerous question,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the transformative one.
And I want to leave the listener with this final provocative thought, going back to Reuben.
The well-meaning brother.
We talked about how Reuben tried to save Joseph from the pit, and the source said that was actually interfering with God's plan, with the necessary surgery.
Yes.
So here is the question for you to chew on. If you were going through a hard time stripping, is it possible that the rescuers in your life, the people trying to fix it for you, the distractions you use to numb the pain, the quick fixes you reach for, are actually interrupting the very work you need to go through?
That is a chilling thought. It makes you look at your comfort mechanisms very differently. Are they helping or are they hindering?
What if the pit isn't a mistake? What if the worst thing that ever happened to you is actually the beginning of your real life?
And what if the silence of God isn't his absence, but his intense focus on your surgery? When the surgeon is cutting, he doesn't talk much. He is focused.
Something to mull over. It's a heavy dive, but I think at the end of the day, a hopeful one.
It's the only hope that holds weight.
Thanks for diving.
For more spiritual resources, visit lokaken.ai.